More than 3 years ago, I tested the BYD Tang in the long trip test, which is one of the hardest tests we do here on the channel. Not only do we measure how many minutes the car being tested has to charge to complete the more than 600-kilometer route, but this test is also designed to find weaknesses and flaws in EVs. The old car managed a charging time of more than an hour when tested back in late 2021, which at the time wasn't great, but today would be abysmal. Hopefully, this new facelifted model with a usable battery capacity of 108.8 kilowatt hours will perform better. After charging almost 4 kilowatt hours from 99% to 99% stated charge, when the car said the charge was full, I disconnected and set off south towards Kristiansand. You meet me on the road after about 1.5 hours. Traveling at 120 kilometers an hour, there's a lot of road noise in this BYD Tang. There's a lot of wind noise, especially off the wing mirrors, and also a lot of tire roar. At speed, this is not a quiet car. And if you want to see how this compares to, for example, the Kia EV9, check out my previous video where I do instrumented noise test at 80, 100, and 120 kilometers an hour. That previous video is a range battle between this and that car, which is an interesting video, so check that video out if you're interested to see how much range this and the Kia EV9 are able to get at 120 kilometers an hour. But with that being said, this being a Chinese car and also a BYD, there are a lot of oddities. I first tested the BYD Tang 3 years ago, and there were a lot of challenges. First off, this car doesn't have a proper trip computer. It only tells you the consumption the past 50 kilometers. And to find out that consumption over the trip, you have to do calculations. So after 140 kilometers on the road, 1.5 hour, we've used 39% stated charge. And when you calculate that over the battery pack size, 108.8 kilowatt hours, and you divide it by the distance, that gives us an average consumption of 30.0 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers, which is high, but this is also a big inefficient vehicle. But you have to do calculations because the car doesn't give you that information. And also another oddity is the actual usable capacity of this car. So for most electric cars on the market, the usable capacity indicates the capacity between 100 and 0% indicated. That is the capacity you're able to use on the road. And for most electric cars, you're able to go down to 0% and you're still going to be able to go at least at 50, 60 kilometers an hour. But with a lot of electric cars, you can even go on the motorway at 100 and 120 kilometers an hour. That varies, but with most cars, you're able to use it down to 0%. And once you hit 0%, there's always a buffer below zero of a few kilowatt hours, meaning with most cars, you're able to go maybe 5, 10, even 15 kilometers in some cars, so you're able to go to a charger. But with this car, I'm pretty sure, like with the previous BYD Tang, 0 to 100% is basically what you have. If you go down to 0, you're basically empty. And the reason I think that is because in the previous test, once I had to hit like 4 or 5%, I had limited power, indicating that we were basically at 0. And also, if you take a look at the numbers, if you subtract the usable capacity from the gross capacity, we only have 2.2 kilowatt hours capacity. So how is that usable? Because there's always a top buffer, so the battery cells aren't at 100% because that will degrade the battery pack really quickly. And also there's always a buffer down to 0%, so you don't brick the battery pack. And what that means in reality, if you discharge a battery pack completely, like down to 0, depleted 100%, the battery pack is ruined. It will be what we call bricked. It will not be able to charge it up again. So that's why I think the actual 0 to 100% here doesn't include a bottom buffer. So we're gonna have to account for that. But with all of that being said, this new BYD Tang has a much bigger battery pack. In the previous video, we were only able to go about 40 kilometers shy of our turnaround point in Kristiansand before we had to just jump to the nearest 50 kilowatt charger because we were that close to running out of electricity. With this car, I think we're going to be able to go to Kristiansand, and according to the navigation, when I put Kristiansand as our halfway point into the route planner, the car said we were going to arrive there with 38% stated charge. But another oddity is that I can't find any information once we put that into the navigation system. Like once we're navigated, there's no more information that shows us how much percent we're going to arrive with, if that percentage goes up or down. Because with most cars, that is going to, you know, be adjusted depending on the consumption, depending on the weather. But none of that information here. But yeah, I still think we're going to be able to go to Kristiansand, but if we're going to arrive there with 38% or 35 or 45, yeah, we'll just have to find out and see once we get there. As we got closer to Kristiansand, the weather got better, the temperature kept rising, but the wind picked up to a headwind of 5 meters per second. I re-entered our destination into the navigation system, and the car now predicted we'd arrive with 23% at our halfway point. We're now in Kristiansand, which is our turnaround point, and yeah, it's really sunny, really nice weather. I actually had to stop and buy some shades because there was so much sun. But we're now here with 15% stated charge, and we've covered 307.4 kilometers according to the car. So what that average consumption is, well, I'm going to do the calculations off camera and I'm going to put it on the screen for you guys because I don't know. But what I can say is that when we started this trip today, the car predicted we would arrive here with 38% stated charge. After the last update, the car predicted we would arrive here with 23% stated charge. But we're here with 15% stated charge, and 67 kilometers of range left. So I put these Circle K chargers in Grimstad, which are about 45 kilometers away. Maybe we'll be able to make it there, maybe not. I want to try to go as far as possible, because if we are only able to go to the Ionity chargers in Lillesand, I'm guessing we're probably going to have to do another charging stop, and that is insane for a car with this big of a battery. So yeah, efficiency, not this car's strong suit, as you guys probably saw from the consumption. But yeah, we're now headed back now, and we're going to try to get to Circle K in Grimstad, but if not, we're going to stop in Lillesand. You guys will know in about a second. We've passed Lillesand, and now we are going to exit here at the Circle K station here in Grimstad, and we're going to connect to the charger over here. Okay, so we're now here at the charger, and the BYD Tang has its charge port here on the rear side, on the passenger side. And what's really cool now is that all of these new chargers that were put up like last year or in 2023 now all have just a payment terminal, so you can just, you know, tap your card and you can easily start the charging. So you don't need any apps or anything, and that is pretty cool. So we arrived here with 6% stated charge, and we've covered 352 kilometers. So I'm going to put the average consumption up on the screen for you guys now. But what's really interesting, you know, compared to the old BYD Tang, is that even at 6% stated charge, the car actually shows you, you know, how much power you have available, which is a nice feature if you want to know if you have power available at 6% stated charge. And when I put the pedal to the floor, it showed I could, you know, there was 155 kilowatts available, a little more than like 220 horsepower. So yeah, that means we probably could have gone even further down in the battery pack and tried to go even further. But the car was estimating 25 kilometers of range left, and I don't really want to push this platform that I'm not that familiar with. So we're now charging, and this car should have a peak charging speed of, and it's really noisy here, I do apologize guys, but this car should have a peak charging speed of 170 kilowatts. Yes, 170 kilowatts. We're only getting 132. So this car has a peak charging speed of 170 kilowatts with a battery pack that is almost 110 kilowatt hours usable. That is very slow. But on top of that, this is actually on an 800 volt architecture. So I've never heard of a car with this big of a battery, even on a 400 volt architecture, that can charge that slow. And that this is on 800 volts, which is really weird. And also, I'm not quite sure if this car does have active preconditioning, because I asked BYD and they said if you use the app, you can precondition the battery. But I don't think that is for fast charging. I think that is for just, you know, getting the battery up to temperature if you want to, you know, travel in the morning at your house from a full charging battery when you're slow charging. And also I put the charger into the navigation system here, so if there was any preconditioning, it should be doing that now. But we're actually getting a little bit more. We're getting 149 kilowatts now. That is a little bit better. But still, that is 70 kilowatts, 20 kilowatts shy of that peak charging speed. So even though this, if this does have preconditioning via the navigation system, I put the charger into the navigation system before we were in Kristiansand, so about 40-50 minutes ago. But the spokesperson at BYD told me that this does have a heating element. So once you connect it to a charger, it will actually precondition, or actually not preconditioning, then it's conditioning, right? Preconditioning means conditioning before you start a charge. Then it does condition the battery to get it up to temperature, and it seems like that's happening now. So okay, it may have been a slow start at, you know, 130 kilowatts, but now we're getting 157. So I'm not entirely sure how much I'm going to charge to, but it's going to take a long time, because for this car to go from 10 to 80% is like 48 minutes. And I don't know if it's a better strategy to just charge to like 40-50% and then do a second charging stop. I don't know. We're going to have to just monitor the charging speed now. If we can have, you know, good charging speed up to, I don't know, like 60-70%, just charging once may actually be the best strategy. But I don't know, we're getting 160 kilowatts now, so speed does seem to be ramping up at least. The charging speed stayed decent up until 40% and then dropped below 100 kilowatts at 50% state of charge. I calculated that I only needed to charge to 68% to be able to make it back to Oslo, so I opted not to disconnect at 50% and do a second charging stop on the way. Once we hit 77%, I felt I had enough of a safety buffer to make it back to Oslo. Once on the way, the car predicted we'd actually arrive back at our starting point with 27% battery left. But like on our way south, this turned out to be unrealistically optimistic, because even my own calculations turned out to be wrong. Yeah, this is one thirsty EV. 1.5 hours late, we are finally back here where we started this long trip test earlier today, because after our charging session, about an hour up the road, the traffic completely stopped. Thankfully, we got here in one piece, and we arrived here with 5% state of charge. So average consumption when we do all the calculations is 29.1 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers. So not the best consumption. So when we correct for the charging also, that meant we charged for a total of 40 minutes, which is by no means fast, but it's a lot better than the car we tested 3 years ago at over an hour. And also today it was colder with worse conditions than that day, because although it was quite mild today, between 2 and 8 degrees Celsius, it was a lot warmer the day we tested the BYD Tang 3 years ago, because we had dry conditions. Though that car was on 22-inch summer wheels and this is on 20-inch winter wheels. But it's been a really long day and I can't wait to get home. So I'm gonna end up this video quickly because it is getting late and I have been on the road for a long time. But let me know what you think about the results of the BYD Tang. I mean, consumption is high, charging time is long, so I'm not particularly impressed by the results because the results aren't that great, but it is an improvement over the old car altogether. So guys, I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, please drop me a thumbs up down below, and for more car content, as always, please subscribe. See you guys later and goodbye.